Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. The green transition is continuing. The economics make it inevitable, but the path has proven to be a rocky road full of ups and downs where projects can get stuck in a rut, often created by politics. And so we're going to talk about electrification today. Most companies have made some version of a climate commitment. Net zero by 2040, for example, carbon neutral by 2030, renewable energy across their operations. Those pledges are only as real as the company's ability to execute, and the gap between those pledges and execution is measured in billions of dollars, thousands of megawatt hours, and supply chains that stretch across dozens of countries and as many different regulatory environments. Steve Wilhite is Executive Vice President of SE Advisory Services at Schneider Electric, where he leads what has become the largest energy management practice in the world. His organization manages more than $40 billion in annual energy spend for clients, advising corporations on more than 350 utility-scale renewable energy power purchase agreements across 5 continents, and serving 40% of the Fortune 500 through a team of 2,800 specialists working in more than 100 countries. If you want to talk electrification and renewable energy, Steve's the guy. He joined Schneider in 2011 after its acquisition of Summit Energy, where he had served as the CEO and president. And under his leadership, Schneider's sustainability business has pioneered first-of-its-kind collaborative programs like Energize, which brought 20 global healthcare companies together to decarbonize their shared supply chains. And it built AI-enabled platforms, including the ExoStructure Resource Advisor, which is ranked as the #1 power purchase agreement marketplace in the world by Guidehouse. There's a lot to cover, and we're going to talk with Steve about what it actually takes to execute a renewable energy strategy at enterprise scale, and how AI is changing what's possible in sustainability management. We'll also get into harder questions, like whether voluntary corporate commitments can hold their momentum as U.S. policy shifts, how companies are making real progress on Scope 3 emissions, and what the convergence of electrification, grid complexity, and AI means for the energy transition ahead. To learn more about Schneider Electric, visit se.com. That's se.com, just 2 letters. No dash, no space, se.com. The gap between sustainability commitments and sustainability outcomes is where Steve Wilhite works every day. Let's find out what he's learned there right after this brief commercial break. Welcome to the show, Steve. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Mitch. It's good to be with you.
Well, thank you for joining me. You're doing interesting work. I mean, you're managing a $40 billion book of business in annual energy spend for clients, and that's a scope that most of us never encounter. So I want to start off by asking, what does operating at that scale reveal about corporate sustainability commitments that most of us just can't see?
Yeah, I mean, great question. One, I'd say we've actually grown since we last gave you that number. It's really up over 50 billion
Wow,
euro
congratulations.
now that's under management. And I say that a little reluctantly because when you're talking about energy spend and energy consumption growing, that's not necessarily a good thing. So that 50 billion is in spite of how we're helping our clients, conserve and save. But back to your question, when you think about the annual energy spend and what is operating at that level of scale reveal, we learn a ton in the process of interacting with clients at that level. One, we get a completely global picture of what's going on all around the world with either globally situated companies or companies that are headquartered in different geographies. And there are some stark differences, as you can imagine. Somebody headquartered in the US is going to see the world completely different than somebody maybe headquartered in the US, but still we have all these global challenges. And the biggest thing that it reveals is the gap between companies' ambition and their ability to execute. So, what we've seen over the course of the last handful of years, a lot of companies making SBTI commitments, making commitments in different geographies or different registries. But then it's oftentimes these commitments are made without knowing how you're going to get there.
Yeah.
and how do you go execute at this? So I think one of the big things it's also revealed is it's not just a singular energy problem or a supply chain problem or purely a risk problem or at times a digital transformation problem. It really becomes a systems problem
Hmm.
and a challenge for an entire ecosystem. So it's easy to get really myopic and say, okay, this one client, I've got to go in and help this one client solve their problem. But when you start to see this across a portfolio of a 50 billion energy spend, but all other metrics as well, tens of thousands of locations, you go, this is a systems problem. This is not just, a single issue.
Is the system getting more sustainable?
I would say I think it is, but it's really we're walking and crawling, or crawling and then walking, and then
Hmm.
it comes in fits and starts. Okay, so is the system becoming more sustainable? I think a lot of us also feel a bit of the pinch if we're living here in the U.S., as you and I both are, of shifting political winds,
Yeah.
and I think we run risks when we allow shifts in political winds to knock us off our course from any perspective of progress. So I do think we're making progress. I think companies are making leaps and bounds progress around scope 1 and scope 2, but where we see a lot of them really wrestling is how do we get to the full ecosystem that includes scope 3.
I want to talk about that a bit later, but right
Yep.
now, what would you say the most persistent misconception that your clients, that 40% of the Fortune 500 or so that you work with, come to you with when they first talk about renewable energy? What are they confused
Yeah.
by or mistaken about?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple. Okay. And I'll, just shooting from the hip here and off the cuff a little bit. I think one of the issues is that, hey, one misperception is that it's going to cost me more. All right. Very simply, oftentimes there's an issue. It's like, okay, buying something green, renewable, it's going to cost me more. Um, it's also kind of dumbing it down, Mitch,
Hmm.
because some folks have this misconception that it's just about buying green power versus buying brown power. And that you underestimate this isn't just three bids in a cloud of dust like you might have when you're buying natural gas or electricity in certain competitive markets. Speed and complexity
Hmm.
of addressing and understanding the need for speed in complex markets is very different with renewables and buying green or procurement buying green energy. There's also it's really a combination of not just green, it's energy, it's sustainability, it's risk, it's a digital transformation that's required, and really understanding your data, especially when you're doing virtual PPAs versus direct PPAs or things like that. And so it's that complexity that really matters. And it's not just a simple, let me go buy green.
Can you briefly explain the difference between a virtual and a physical PPA?
Yeah, so maybe a physical direct. Very simply, you might have a third party come and put solar on your facility or on your
Hmm.
rooftop, or you have a piece of property where you put solar or wind or some other form, geothermal, some other form, and you're directly connected to that green source. Or what's become much more common across larger organizations where you have multiple sites and multiple locations, the virtual is where you can buy utility scale, be the primary off taker contractually of a utility scale uh, green facility of solar,
Hmm.
wind, et cetera. And you're essentially buying electrons off the grid, even though you are contractually obligated to buy the output of a single utility scale wind or solar farm.
Giving you more resilience on the one hand and the benefits of green power on the other.
Yeah, giving you more resilience and also buying it at scale.
Yeah.
And it's also a de-risking because
Mhm.
you're buying something off of a system as opposed to, if your local solar farm goes down, what happens as opposed to the contractual obligation with the utility scale.
That challenging speed and complexity you asked or you mentioned a few moments ago,
Yeah.
has that been reduced by the fact that we're later in the development of the market now? And how much has that changed as the market has matured?
Okay. So, I mean, it's interesting to consider that question because it's really been volatility. And this is where the speed and complexity still bite. And let me give you a specific
Hmm.
example as I think back. on this market 3 or 4 years ago, we felt like there were a lot of complexities that existed. Clients needed a lot of handholding. In effect, when you look at the part of our business that does the renewable deals and orchestrates on behalf of our clients, we're essentially acting like an investment banker in
Mhm.
putting sophisticated buyers and sophisticated sellers together and orchestrating that deal. And the complexities are there in the deal. You'd think that by now those complexities would work their way out of a system, okay? And as opposed to lingering over time, you think it gets more easy, more transactable, et cetera. And it's actually going the opposite direction. We have more grid constraints to deal with on the system. So as companies are considering, where do I contract for my PPA or my virtual PPA? The other thing is the market dynamics shift from being a buyer's market to a seller's market.
Mhm.
Case in point, there were about 10% fewer or lower PPAs done in 2025 than were done in 2024, about 10%. First time in almost a decade that we've seen less done. Now, why is that? Some could blame the current administration, some might blame policy shifting, some of it's just supply and demand. Okay. So we've seen that, and we've also seen tech giants buying up a lot of this and constraining the capacity, making it more difficult for other non-tech entities to wedge their way into that market. So the complexities really shift, and we've seen that continue to grow.
That's interesting. Just as in investment banking, which became more specialized as the markets became more financialized, the
Yes,
more that we connect and interconnect the grid and add the new capacity, which is often in a distributed form rather than the centralized form that
correct.
we knew 40 or 50 years ago as just standard, it's harder to do your job. But that also obviously is creating a lot of business opportunity for you. Can you briefly put in context that kind of investment banker role you're playing in configuring the PPAs in relation to the work you do wiring the systems once they're in place?
Yeah. So as far as wiring the system, the physical side of it, whole nother part of Schneider is really
Hmm.
focused on, how we help the grid
Hmm.
enhance the reliability of the grid. The work we do at the low and medium voltage level in terms of enhancing the reliability of, say, data centers. I mean, you can't go anywhere in the U.S., Mitch, with your phone and not be touching a data center that's been largely built by Schneider Electric because of all the work we do in the power systems and the racks and the cooling systems of data centers, et cetera. So we're very familiar with that side of it. And we work hard, by the way, on that side of it to help make those very energy efficient for our clients. We work for everybody you can imagine, all names that we can't talk about. So we're very well versed on that side. But what a lot of folks don't realize is that historically, in this SE advisory side of the business, we've been modeling energy markets on all fronts around the world for a number of years. So when I say modeling them, we're having to model the natural gas markets, the oil markets, which of course we're having a lot of fun right now, that's for sure, given current events in the Middle East. And that affects natural gas and LNG. You know the whole story, I'm sure there. But the fact that we're having to model these markets so that our advice to clients on how best to handle and manage the risk associated with the investment in any asset, PPA, virtual PPAs, buying brown, dirty power, et cetera, comes into play. And that's part of the risk and the complexity that
Yeah.
gets incorporated into our investment banking recommendations.
You raise an interesting point that in terms of modeling, the complexity of modeling the economy under this administration has only become more pronounced with each passing month. Putting aside the pushback against renewable energy, how has the Trump administration's very, trying to find a way to say this that doesn't sound just critical, but
Go ahead, see, say it.
erratic approach to policy changed the way that you and your clients think about planning your energy needs?
Okay, I mean, it's a great question. And I think one of the challenges we've had, by the way, we've had volatility and a bit of erratic, maybe, throughout the energy kind of history, if you
Mm-hmm.
stop and think about it.
Okay.
Sometimes that volatility is coming from political angles. Oftentimes that volatility is coming from weather related
Yeah.
incidents. I mean, I can remember back on Hurricane Katrina, knocking out all kinds of offshore natural gas and oil. As you probably recall that as well, and the kind of volatility that really introduced. The interesting thing about this is historically we viewed those things, including the political volatility,
Hmm.
as black swan events that were separated by a lot of time.
Yeah.
And what we see happening now is a compression where these types of, let's call it black swan, if we
Hmm.
could, whether it's a war in the Middle East, whether it's a Russia, Ukraine, whether it's changes in political climate, and not just in the US, by the way, I mean, in other
Yeah.
countries and other zones, have become par for the course. And so the key on some of this, if I could tell you that we're the best predictor of that type of erratic weather or erratic political climate, you name it, then we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd be, kicking up in my fully sustainable location on an island somewhere. But
That's so reassuring. Thank you.
exactly, there you go. The key is how do we really begin to empirically account for more of those types of events and black swan events in the way we view the market. And I can tell you another big one right now, and not to take us off track so you can pull us back wherever you want. Look, we all recognize the growth of data centers
Mhm.
and the increasing utilization of AI and the increasing infrastructure and the constraints it puts on the grid. By the way, we've got to really work to model that into the equation as much as a change in administration. And so those kinds of things are really coming into play, and we have to take that into account in the advice that we give to clients and that. And by the way, one other quick side note, and I'll pause. This is also why effective utilization of AI in certain markets is really every market around the world
Mhm.
around data and the latest and greatest information is critical. Quick case in point, we started deploying reinforcement learning bots and AI in our risk management models a number of years ago, prior to Russia invading Ukraine. And those reinforcement learning bots allowed us to place buy and sell triggers on behalf of our clients in highly volatile energy markets where they're moving very fast, as you can imagine.
Mhm.
Russia invades Ukraine. Go back and look at the volatility of what happened in energy markets was crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. By and large, had we not already had that type of technology deployed in our systems, which by the way has gotten even better since, especially with generative AI and agentic AI, had we not had that deployed in our systems, we would not have been able to help our clients through that in the same effective way.
So we're in the era of the erratic, and
Yep.
typically corporate renewable procurement agreements get framed as a win-win. You get clean energy and it's cheaper. Is that consistently true now, or is that an oversimplification that that the executives need to understand is a description of a set of trade-offs they need to think about when they're making these decisions?
I think win-win oversimplifies it.
Okay.
Just to be really simple with my answer. If I expand on that, I think what we see, because these deals are done in the C-suite.
Hmm.
These deals aren't done at a corporate buyer level. I mean, at a lower level in the organization. They're done in the C-suite. I can tell you, the CFOs, the CEOs, the CSOs, they're all weighing things like the trade-offs and risk. Okay, because a lot of these are risk management tools and the risks associated with it. And sometimes some of them are physical risks. Take what happened in West Texas years ago in the big freeze and the winter storm, risks of the operability of those wind assets in
Hmm.
extreme weather conditions. Um, but it's risks around contract terms, risks around regulatory, okay,
Yeah.
removing of the tax credit transferability or some of the investment tax credit, production tax credit, that people have taken advantage of. So it's an oversimplification. It can be win-win, but I think it's really balancing all of these things.
It's complicated times. I want to, before we take a quick commercial break, talk
Yeah.
about scope three. You mentioned this earlier, that scope one and two are getting well addressed. ultimately, if every organization has a clear understanding of its scope 1 and 2 emissions, will scope 3 emission calculation become simplified because we're all publishing that information? Or does our own focus on confidentiality prevent us from sharing that information so we can see the entire system's impact in total?
I think the confidentiality can, I mean, the over emphasis on confidentiality can be a barrier, to just hit that one. It doesn't have to be, but it can be a bit of a barrier if you don't have the right mechanisms in place to really work through that. Um, I would say at the start, most companies treated scope 3 almost as a point, for lack of a better description, Mitch, a point solution effort.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the companies that have really been able to make advances have treated it as more as a systems problem or as an ecosystem problem. Okay. So you start out simple. You say, let me collect the information from my supply chain, from my suppliers. Okay. But if it just becomes a data collection effort, which by the way
Yeah.
is monumental oftentimes, without taking into account, okay, how do I collect this data and then translate this into action? And by the way, our own company has experienced this. We experienced the nicks and cuts and the bumps and bruises. And, we're the number one Time magazine, most sustainable company. Corporate Knights a couple years in a row there.
Yeah.
By the way, it didn't come without the cuts and bruises along the way on that and learning.
But if you didn't learn, you wouldn't be where you are today. And the
Completely.
key to that seems to be your visibility based on your use of AI and machine learning generally over the course of the past decade.
Oh, it's been absolutely critical. And I mean, the use of AI to help contextualize the data, help drive us towards the right actions to take. Just a quick case in point, I'll give you an example. In our own zero carbon program,
Mm-hmm.
when we launched that program in 2021-ish, we had a 5-year plan and we made commitments that we would reduce the carbon of our top 1,000 suppliers by 50%. Okay. At the time we made that, we had no clue how we were going to get there. We put the 5-year target out there. My business was serving our own company as a client and how to get there. When we launched it, we surveyed just to go gather the data, try and get the data from our top 1,000 suppliers. All 1,000, by the way, signed up in the first 2 weeks of announcing the
Wow.
program. All 1,000, and actually 15 additional said, we want to be considered part of it. So we were oversubscribed. Okay. 83 to 84% of them didn't know what they signed up for. So they said, we want in the supply chain. We don't know what this means, but we want in. Okay. So that caused us to say, oh, we have a massive education effort because they don't even know
Yeah.
what a baseline is. They don't know what they signed up for. And these are our top 1,000. So we embarked on that and had to look at it as a systems challenge of how do we educate? How do we bring them up the curve? How do we help provide simple tools for them to provide the measurement and baseline? But then that's worthless if we don't come alongside them and say, hey, based on our analysis, based on the tools we have in place, here are the actions that can be taken to help you on that journey. And so we hit those targets, by the way. We just concluded that and reported that to the market just recently. But I'm telling you, we learned so much in that process that it became a systems and an ecosystem challenge, not just let me go get this one supplier. How do we get this at scale?
There's so much to talk about here because what you're describing is a global nervous system that we're
Yes.
building in order to understand our impact on society and the planet and everything.
Yep.
But let's take a quick commercial break, and we're going to come right back to talk more with Steve Wilhite. Folks, stay tuned. Welcome back to Sustainability in Your Ear. Now let's get back to my conversation with Steve Wilhite. He's Executive Vice President of Advisory Services at Schneider Electric. Steve, you all have built something called the EcoStruxure Resource Advisor Copilot, and it uses large language models, AI, that we were talking about before, to support the data analysis, decision support, performance optimization. It does a lot of things with regard to the management of the grid. But what I'm wondering is at this point, are we seeing AI's environmental impacts, all the energy it uses, offset by the AI-driven environmental benefits of optimizing the grid?
Yeah. So the short answer on that is I would say yes. What I don't have, Mitch, is at the whole system level. But
Hmm.
I can give you a couple specific anecdotes or cases in point. When I look at how much time and effort was taken to process data on behalf of our clients, okay,
Hmm.
and we can make inferences about the amount of carbon footprint associated with that. Let me give you just a quick example. We take in more than 1 million energy invoices per month
Hmm.
into our systems and platforms. We multi-purpose that data for, we talked earlier about how we help clients manage risk associated with the commodity markets, how we help them buy more effectively. But that data, a lot of that data goes in and forms their scope 1 and scope 2 footprint, for which they turn around and have to report from a compliance perspective, et cetera. So historically, about 5% of those invoices tend to kick out with anomalies. We've applied traditional forms of AI, whether it be robotic process automation, machine learning, et cetera, to those invoices. But picture 50,000-ish energy invoices, all kinds of languages, all around the world, from every shape and size utility you can imagine coming in, kicking out with anomalies. It would take between 10 and 15 business days for all of those anomalies to be resolved, rectified, and corrected in a way that the client can actually use that data and information for decision making. Now, translate that to fast moving markets where they're making decisions in markets that are moving very quickly. We talked about
Hmm.
the erratic and volatility associated with these markets. And if they don't have good, clean data, they are jeopardizing the decisions they're making. They're also jeopardizing the reports and the compliance, et cetera, that they're having to adhere to. Fast track to today, we have deployed agentic AI, which I would consider the much newer versions on our AI native platform. So today, Resource Advisor Plus is now AI native. What we
Hmm.
said is it's not going to be good enough to layer traditional forms of AI on top of legacy systems and new forms of AI on top of legacy systems. So we basically redid our entire platform to be AI native from the foundation up. So we've deployed agents
Hmm.
against this problem, just as one area of example. So we have Anna, who's the anomaly agent, that works with a team of agents that all have their own toolbox.
Yep.
Some of those toolboxes are rate libraries. Some of those toolboxes are other forms of measurement. But today, that team of agents actually will resolve those 50,000 kickouts in a matter of seconds or minutes
Yeah.
at accuracy rates that far exceed the level of human ability to actually resolve and get those errors identified and resolved. So if you think about the amount of time and the amount of human carbon and the amount of carbon
Hmm.
activity that's taken place just in screens, et cetera, like what we're sharing right now,
Yeah.
compared to the amount of energy consumed by a few tokens of interaction in a very brief period of time, there's no doubt, and we do measure it, by the way, there's no doubt the benefit that comes in that example.
I would love to see that data. It's a question that I've been thinking about a lot, both in my work and as when writing for Earth 911. But this raises an interesting question about what's the trajectory of employment opportunity in the grid-related industries. I mean, Schneider's been recognized repeatedly for your success because you blend digital tools and human expertise. What's the right balance of software and specialists in an organization that's increasingly using AI? How do you think about
Right.
that?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a wrestling match all the time. The context that we approach it with is what we call collaborative intelligence.
Hmm.
So we know that the decades of expertise that exist in energy and sustainability domains matter. Now, we need those decades of energy expertise and sustainability expertise in order to help the client make effective decisions. So it's how do we bring AI alongside that 20 years of history and domain expertise that exists in a lot of human brains and minds and amplify it versus replace it. And so clearly there are some roles that will get replaced by AI. I can't deny that. We see that
Sure.
happening
Yeah.
already. But I think the far bigger opportunity is how do we amplify the human mind and the human capacity to be able to deploy even more effectively, for the client and for the end user.
I've worked with a number of organizations on exactly this question in my consulting, and here's the challenge that every one of them is facing is how do you develop the senior talent that will bring that intuition in 10 or 20 years to the problem? What's Schneider's strategy with regard to that at this time?
Yeah, another great question, Mitch. Um, I think our labor models, we have to wrestle with what these labor and business models will look like in the future. Okay. If I just take a traditional consulting business,
Hmm.
it's very much a pyramid, right? You've got managing partners at the top, you have junior consultants at the bottom,
Yeah.
and the objective is for the managing partners to deploy as much of the work to the junior consultants. But I think that typical triangle might shift to look more like a diamond, or it's going to get squished, and you may have more of that work that you might have been deploying to junior consultants going to AI in a collaborative manner. And by the way, there's some great articles out there I'm sure you've seen about what it's going to do to the legal industry.
Yeah, well,
You
yeah.
know, you see lawyers that may not need junior lawyers anymore because they have uh,
Well, in investment banking, like we were talking about before, I mean, the junior analyst who does all the work that the senior analyst uses to make decisions is not going to get the experience that the senior analyst has having grown up in a pre-AI era.
yeah. And so one thing I think that's going to happen in the consulting and advisory world is we will all have to be very intentional about bringing in the junior players that have the high aptitude for learning and for embracing these kinds of digital tools and AI tools. Because if you totally starve the bottom of that pyramid or bottom of that triangle, we're going to age out,
Yeah,
right? I mean, it's inevitable. And so I think you have to be very intentional about that. Now, some career paths I think are forever changed. Okay.
absolutely.
Um, and you know this, I would never recommend one of my kids or grandkids now to be going into the field of pure software development.
Hmm.
I think it's very narrow. I think the AI assisted coding, which we are absolutely deploying and utilizing, has completely changed that landscape. And by the way, it's completely changed product development, not just engineering.
Yeah.
It's changed how products are developed. And so I think it's a pretty dramatic effort. And by the way, one other comment I want to make, and I apologize for going on too long here, around this influence of AI and on the energy equation, and is there a benefit? One of the things that we've done in our AI native platform and our systems is really taken a frugal AI approach
Hmm.
to it. So, in the ways in which we've designed our systems, we aren't taking sledgehammers to thumbtacks. All right. You can take a language model that used 10 times the amount of energy that another language model could have used, or tokens,
Yeah.
to accomplish the same task. And so if you don't need that language model to accomplish that task, then don't do it just to be sexy, because you're burning kilowatt hours or megawatt hours in the process doing something that didn't need it. And that's a critical thing that I don't think many companies are thinking about. And so that's being built into the way we design, partly because, Mitch, it's in our DNA. And the other piece of that is also where we host it, because you want to host this stuff on clean grids.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you have multiple layers of decision making to deal with there.
Steve, we're going to have another conversation about the idea of orchestrating the entire stack. I don't want to get into that now, but
All
here's
right.
the meta question.
Yep.
Will we be able to see the entire system and begin to tune it really truly at a global level in order to ultimately radically reduce our energy requirements to deliver the lifestyle that people have come to expect?
I think we will. And part of the reason for that, Mitch, is I think we have consistently underestimated the importance and impact of a complete digital transformation in everything that we're doing today.
Mhm.
So to say that we will not be able to measure this at a system level, you'll have some parts of the world that are behind. That's for sure. But I fully believe that that will be measurable at a system level. And actually, and I don't want to confuse that with saying that all decisions will be made at a centralized level either.
Mhm.
Because sometimes we mix the two up and think that a full system view means everything's going to be made centrally. All
Right,
decisions will be
exactly.
made. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole notion of distributed intelligence becomes relevant here. But one of the ways that is made tangible is when organizations start to work together to optimize their supply chains and
Yeah, for
decarbonize
sure.
them. And your Energize program brought together 20 healthcare companies to decarbonize their supply chains. What made that collaboration work? And why don't we see more of that in more sectors? Is it partly because of that confidentiality concern that I mentioned earlier, that people don't want to share that kind of information?
Um, that's part of it. Like for example, if you look at some industries that are highly competitive,
Hmm.
okay, I mean, every industry is competitive to a degree. I will say that specifically in the energized, the pharmaceutical, while competitive, there is a higher degree of collaboration that takes place between these companies. They tend to come together over lobbying and areas like that, that they kind of join forces. I can name a few beverage companies that
Hmm.
they'll never work together. you know, for never the twain shall meet. So they'd rather focus on their own, particular ecosystem. But in the case of Energize and the pharmaceutical, 22 companies came together. But when you have 22 companies that are as dominant as those are, I mean, it started out as 15 suppliers, and then I think half a dozen or so more joined after the
Hmm.
initial 15. But when they come together and they all share a common supply chain, and that pressure incentive is coming from the whole supply chain, it makes it where a supplier can't necessarily opt in or out. They say, I've got to
Hmm.
deal with this because the whole supply chain is driving this. And that's what then turns it into an ecosystem challenge and opportunity then for them to take collective action in certain ways.
Do you find that executives who in these competitive industries and believe that they're working with isolated ecosystems find it to be a revelation when they discover how interconnected their supply chains are with other companies?
For sure. And that's a real, I mean, true observation there, Mitch, because they're both enlightened in it. And it's also, if you do it in such a way that doesn't really reveal competitive advantages between the two, they see this is a common problem and challenge that's addressing, all that everyone's having to address in some way, shape, or form. And by the way, I want to use this. It's not just the green and the carbon element in
Hmm.
these ecosystems that's important. And if I could make one comment, and you can go wherever you want with
Sure,
this.
go for it.
I think a mistake that we in the sustainability community have made that sometimes taints our efforts is we've allowed climate to equal sustainability.
Hmm.
And I think that's a mistake because sustainability is much broader than
Yeah.
that. It's about the overall health of an ecosystem. That climate is a big part of it. By the way, financial ROI is a big
Hmm.
part of it. Human rights and good working conditions is a big part of it. The list goes on. You're familiar with all this stuff, but in some of our climate zeal, we allowed one to equal the other, which invites political parties into the equation to fight over things that we should be completely unified about. you know,
Ain't it the
so
truth? Ain't it the truth?
it's just crazy. But some of that's on us for letting those things equate and not recognizing, hey, we need to do this in a way that's financially sustainable. Some countries are
Yeah.
far behind, and to hamper, a developing country with some of these things and not figure out how do we help move this needle? How do we bring more energy efficiency into the equation? I think we can, if we can regain a bit of that, Mitch, I think we can make a ton of progress together.
In the context of what you just said, the federal regulatory floor is softening, to put it mildly, but there's going to be a lot of state level policy and potentially a lot of voluntary corporate commitments made to keep the pace of the energy transition where we need
Yep.
it to be. Is
Yep.
that fragmentation of the political conversation going to slow this in the long run, or could it potentially accelerate it?
So I'm going to give you, I'll give you a bit of a bifurcated or bimodal answer on that. I
It's
think what it
erratic
did,
times. Don't worry about it.
yeah, it's erratic times. I think it did more initially to change how we talk about it.
Hmm.
Okay, so companies, across our client base, we did not see many companies pulling back and saying, I'm retrenching, et cetera. We saw more companies getting more specific about what was achievable, maybe because of more clarity. In other words, forget a change in administration in the US. Take our zero carbon program and everything we went through to figure out how did we get to the level we got to. Well, now we've learned, and we may need to adjust our targets. We haven't really, but other companies might have to adjust their targets now that they have more clarity on the data and the information and what they can accomplish. And so we've seen more of that come versus a change because we have a different president here in the
Yeah.
US, just as one example. So I think it has the potential to slow it down in some respects because of the way we talk about it. But the potential to speed it up is that more and more companies now, if they have the data, are saying, okay, I got to move this from ambition to action. What do I do
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah.
And they're clearly focusing on things that have better ROIs initially.
I've seen the same thing across the board.
Yeah.
Given all these changes, all this erratic stuff, where do you see us a decade from now in terms of the sophistication of our grid and our management of that grid?
Well, I'm going to be telling my grandkids to turn that light off just as much as I told my kids to turn that light off, right?
And don't leave the refrigerator door open.
Exactly. Um, I do think that the energy landscape specifically is going to continue to morph and shift dramatically. I think the onset of, significantly increase in data centers is going to, is having a dramatic effect.
Mhm.
By the way, we're doing more and more consulting studies and work with these data centers on where to locate, where they could potentially locate on the grid in areas of cleaner grids,
Yeah.
less grid constraints. You saw the administration here in the US making a move to say we're going to insulate the general body of ratepayers or customers from the impact of data centers coming onto the grid. I actually think we're going to see a lot of these tech giants and players becoming more creative in how they free up capacity on the grid.
Yeah.
I think technology is going to advance on the data center side as well as other electrification paybacks and activities that's going to just enhance the move or speed up the move to more energy efficient applications. But let me say this: imagine a world where one of the big tech giants wants to locate a data center and it's transmission grid constrained, it's system constrained, et cetera. And you saw Microsoft make the move to bring 3 Mile, one of the units of 3 Mile Island back into, into play and
Mhm.
other nuclear considerations. So, quick side note: I do think nuclear will make a comeback. I don't know whether it be the 10-year time frame, but that'll come back. But I also think you'll see more creative financing mechanisms. So, to imagine a world where you have a tech player that says, you know what? It'd be cheaper for me to spend 500 million on investing in energy efficiency in the community where I want to go. And rather than pour more money into a new generating plant,
Yeah.
we can bring super high benefits to thousands of homes and businesses and facilities by investing in their energy efficiency, which frees up the capacity that we might need to put more AI in the grid. I think
Well, and again, you're hitting that note that I think people need to understand is that the symphony of electrons that we need to conduct appropriately in order to serve all our needs is shifting radically, and there's so much potential benefit from AI's ability simply to deal with complexity.
yeah.
But we need to think about the entire ecosystem, the benefits to the community that you were just talking about and speaking to before. I think we could talk for hours, Steve, but we have to cut it short because our listeners are probably finishing their commute. How can folks follow Schneider's progress? What should they do to keep track of you?
Yeah, so we can provide a couple of different website and links. Very simply. I should have those right off the top of my head, but we can provide those separately. And if you want to post them into this recording, that'd be great. We can do that. One other thought I want to leave with you, because
Hmm.
one of the things that we're talking about is this new energy landscape that's coming. over the next decade. There's this term. I want you to, Mitch, to say you've heard it here first. I hope, at some point. But we refer to this internally as the mesh grid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what I believe is coming is where we are all nodes on a network. And more of us are both producing nodes and consuming nodes. You have batteries in your possession, all over your dwelling place, right? And we will have producing and consuming nodes. And what technology and AI is going to do for us is give us the ability to completely optimize those nodes on the network in a way that's going to bring increased value to the overall equation. And Schneider will be at the center of that mesh grid in the way we orchestrate, the way we arm the system to operate more effectively and more efficiently, regardless of whether it's your home, your business, the grid, a data center, whatever the case may be.
Steve, thank you for your time today. I hope you come back and tell us more about how that continues to evolve. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thanks, Mitch. It's good to meet you and enjoyed doing it with you.
Welcome back to Sustainability in Your Ear. You've been listening to my conversation with Steve Wilhite. He's the Executive Vice President of Advisory Services at Schneider Electric. And you can follow Schneider's sustainability work and learn more about its EcoStruxure platform at se.com. That's just two letters, SE, no space, no dash, se.com. This conversation was, frankly, it was a lesson in systems thinking dressed as an energy industry briefing. Steve opened up with an observation that stuck with me and still has me thinking. Managing $50 billion in annual energy spending for Fortune 500 clients has made one thing unmistakably clear to him. The biggest obstacle to corporate sustainability isn't funding, technology, or even political will. It's the gap between ambition and the operational capacity to execute on it. Companies have been signing commitments faster than they've been building the infrastructure to keep them. And that's ironic at a time when, it's an inversion of the AI spending spree in which many companies have already spent $100 million on NVIDIA chips that they aren't even using. They just want to have them there, have the compute capacity available so that when they figure out what to do with it, they're ready to turn it on. By contrast, we know what runs on the grid. We just need more generation, more local two-way energy distribution networks, and long-haul transmission lines to make corporate commitments more than paper aspirations. It's what the data actually shows when you look at the full scale of the electric infrastructure. The AI question that I put to Steve, is it a net environmental positive yet, or are we still in the environmental red? It doesn't have a clean system-level answer, and he said so honestly. What he could show us is what it looks like when AI is doing real work. And when you have 1 million energy invoices a month flowing into Schneider's platform and 5% kick-out anomalies that just a couple of years ago took 10 to 15 business days to resolve, which would leave power purchasers to make consequential decisions based on compromised data. Today, agentic AI systems resolve those 50,000 anomalies in seconds and with accuracy rates that exceed what human teams could achieve in those 10 to 15 days. So there's a huge time savings, but there also is real-time data integrity that can reduce costs, reduce wasted energy allocation, and drastically improve emissions reporting while improving risk management for the corporate client. So it's a compelling story that's going to drive a lot of investment. But zoom out from that single use case and something larger comes into view. What Steve's describing and what electrification is quietly building beneath every one of those conversations is a global digital nervous system. Every meter, every invoice, every power purchase agreement, every anomaly flagged and resolved in seconds. All of these are signals traveling through a network that didn't exist a generation ago, along with all the stuff we watch on YouTube. The more of that network that we build, the more that we can see into the wasteful industrial system by putting sensors and smart devices everywhere, we can make changes, and companies will be eager to make those changes because it will save them money and increase profitability. And the more we can see, the more that we can optimize, not just at the corporate level, but at the system level, at the societal level, to deliver environmental benefits that are desperately needed right now. That is a compelling vision for us to be aiming for. And that's what makes the mesh grid concept so significant. Steve described a future where all of us, homes, businesses, data centers, electric vehicles, community solar arrays, they're all simultaneously producing and consuming nodes on a shared network, with AI continuously optimizing the flows of energy between them. But the mesh grid isn't just an engineering story, it's also a political and economic one. When intelligence moves to the edge of the network, so does political power. Consumer choice, community resilience, and competitive advantage are no longer dependent on proximity to a centralized plant, to a monopoly cordially described as a utility, or a long term contract negotiated in a boardroom somewhere. A factory in rural Ohio, a hospital in Phoenix, a neighborhood in Lagos, each of them becomes capable of acting on real time information about the cost, the carbon impacts, and grid conditions in a way that wasn't even possible when the grid was a one way broadcast network from the coal plant to a meter and ultimately to your toaster. The efficiency gains that Steve is pointing toward are structural. It's the reinvention that people have been clamoring for, but not first with politics and the way that we organize our economy. It's about engineering a new potential reality. Of course, we're still going to need to deal with inventing an equitable, prosperity spreading social and political construct to go with this new infrastructure. But changes of this magnitude in the way that we source and use energy always transform society. Steve also said something that I think that the sustainability community needs to hear more plainly than it usually does. We've made a strategic mistake by letting climate alone become synonymous with sustainability. The two are not the same. Sustainability is a broader system problem. It encompasses financial resilience, human rights, supply chain integrity, and ecosystem health. By collapsing it into a single issue, we handed political actors an opening that they've exploited ever since. In other words, we oversimplified and they made ridiculously simplistic arguments sound feasible to a large number of voters. Reclaiming the full frame, expanding the aperture, is the only way to build durable conditions that can survive shifts in the political winds that will result in the prosperous, equitable economy that we need in the future. And I hope to bring Steve back to get into the questions we didn't have the time to finish. Like, what does responsible AI infrastructure design actually look like, from model selection to where the compute is hosted, and on which grid? What would it take to scale the energized collaborative model, which brought 22 healthcare companies together to decarbonize a shared supply chain into sectors where competition has always kept those players apart? And what does it actually mean to see and tune an entire system without centralizing every decision in it? That's the distributed intelligence question, and it runs straight through everything Steve said today. The pace for getting a new infrastructure right is measured in grid constraints introduced by retrograde policy, in the renewable PPAs that didn't get done in 2025 because of political headwinds, and the data centers looking for clean capacity that doesn't exist yet, that we still need to build. The digital nervous system is being wired right now. The mesh grid is being built right now. The question is whether we design them to move efficiency, resilience, and agency to the edges of the network, or whether we replicate the old centralized architecture in a digital form and just call it progress. So stay tuned. We will continue to talk with innovators and thinkers that are untangling the Gordian knot that we call the present. It's time for a change, folks. And by the way, I hope you take a look at our archive of more than 550 episodes of Sustainability in Your Ear. We're in our 6th season, and I guarantee you there's an interview that you're going to want to share with one of your friends. So please take a look. And do me a favor, write a review on your favorite podcast platform about sustainability in your ear. It'll help your neighbors find us because, folks, you are the amplifiers to spread more ideas to create less waste. So please tell your friends, family, coworkers, the people you meet on the street that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or whatever purveyor of podcast goodness they prefer. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.